I was 26 years old when I came to Seoul, and if I close my eyes, I can still remember exactly how the city looked the morning my life changed. Spring had just begun to settle over everything. The cold had not disappeared completely, but it had softened, and the cherry blossom trees lining the streets looked as though the sky had leaned down in the night and brushed pink against their branches. Petals drifted through the air and landed on polished sidewalks, on taxi roofs, on the shoulders of people hurrying to work. The city was waking up in layers. The sound of buses sighing to a stop. The distant chime of crosswalk signals. The soft rumble of delivery trucks. The scent of coffee, rain left over from the night before, and hot bread from a bakery I passed every morning on my way to the business district. Everything felt bright and beautiful and intimidating all at once, which, if I am being honest, was exactly how my whole life felt back then. My name is Amara Okafor. I was born in Nigeria, in a home where hard work was not something people talked about as though it were admirable. It was simply expected. My mother taught economics at a secondary school, my father ran a small import supply business, and from the time I was a girl, I listened to conversations about money, contracts, delayed shipments, changing prices, and people with good ideas who never got the chance to grow because they could not connect to the right markets. I loved those conversations. Some girls fell in love with fairy tales. I fell in love with strategy. I wanted to understand how businesses worked, why some survived, why some collapsed, why some people could turn a small local idea into something that crossed oceans. By the time I got older, I knew I wanted to study business, not because I dreamed of wearing sharp suits and sitting in glass offices, but because I wanted to learn enough to return home and help African entrepreneurs build stronger companies, better systems, and broader reach. I wanted to help people create wealth that stayed in their communities. That dream became even bigger the day I discovered Korean companies and how aggressively they expanded, branded, and adapted. I taught myself Korean in secret at first. At night, while everyone else slept, I would sit with my laptop and headphones and repeat words until my tongue stopped fighting the sounds. I watched language lessons, Korean interviews, business presentations, dramas, news clips, anything I could find. I wrote vocabulary on index cards and taped them above my desk. I practiced pronunciation while brushing my teeth, while cooking, while walking to class. People thought it was strange, but I did not care. There was something about the language that fascinated me. It was precise, layered, elegant. It felt like a locked door I had decided I would open no matter how long it took. Years later, when I applied for an international internship program focused on global business operations and cross-cultural corporate development, that same strange obsession became the very thing that set me apart. Out of all the places I could have ended up, I was selected for Seoul. I still remember the email. I read it 3 times before I believed it, then I cried so hard my mother came running into the room thinking someone had died. Seoul was not home, but it was not a disappointment either. It was alive in a way I had never experienced. The city glowed at night as if darkness itself had no authority there. Towering buildings of steel and glass reflected whole rivers of light. Screens flashed advertisements over crowded intersections. People moved fast, spoke fast, worked fast. Everything around me seemed disciplined, polished, and relentless. I loved it. I was also lonely in it. I was new. I was foreign. I was one of the few black women in certain spaces, and I felt every stare even when people pretended not to stare. Still, I refused to let any of that shake me. I had not traveled halfway across the world to become timid. I came to learn, to prove myself, and to build a future I had imagined for years. The morning I was due to report for my internship intake at Kang Global, I woke before sunrise. I wanted everything perfect. My blouse had been ironed the night before. My cream skirt hung neatly from the wardrobe. My heels were polished. My hair was styled in a way that framed my face but still looked professional. I remember standing in the mirror and taking one last breath before leaving my apartment. My skin looked warm against the pale fabric. My eyes were bright with nerves and hope. I told myself, you earned this. Walk like you belong there. By the time I stepped outside, the city was still cool from the night air. The sky had begun shifting from deep blue to silver. The cherry blossoms looked almost unreal in that half-light, and I smiled, thinking that if anyone had told a younger version of me in Nigeria that one day I would be walking beneath spring blossoms in Seoul on my way to a global corporation, I would have laughed in their face. Kang Global's headquarters rose over the street like it had been designed by someone who wanted architecture to intimidate people before they ever crossed the front doors. Glass. Steel. Clean lines. Power with a lobby. I slowed down just before reaching the entrance because something ahead of me felt wrong. Two men stood near the side of the building where company vehicles pulled in, and one of them was speaking in low, urgent tones to a tall man in a dark charcoal suit. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him. He stood straight, shoulders square, one hand in his coat pocket, as if he had no time for foolishness. The other man moved closer, said something I could not hear, and then, in one sharp motion, shoved him hard enough that he stumbled back against the side of a car. It happened fast. Too fast. There was no dramatic weapon, no wild fight, nothing that would make passing strangers immediately scream. It looked almost controlled. Deliberate. A threat disguised as an incident. I heard one of them say in Korean, "Next time you may not be so lucky," and then both men moved away quickly, blending toward the service lane before security could react. The man in the suit tried to steady himself, but he bent slightly, one hand braced against the car as though the force of the shove had knocked the breath out of him. I did not think. I ran. When I reached him, I saw that he had hit the side mirror and split the skin at the base of his hand. Not a severe injury, but enough to leave a streak of blood against his knuckles. There was also the kind of shock in his face that had less to do with pain and more to do with anger at having been caught off balance. I touched his arm gently. "Excuse me, are you all right? Can you hear me?" He lifted his head and looked at me. Even then, before I knew who he was, I noticed his face. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe 33 or 34, with sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, and the kind of quiet composure that made other people instinctively move out of his way. His hair was neatly styled, but one strand had fallen loose across his forehead. His tie was slightly out of place from the struggle. He was handsome, yes, but not in a soft or easy way. He looked like a man built from discipline. A man used to winning. A man used to control. "I'm fine," he said automatically in Korean. "No, you're not," I replied, switching into the same language without hesitation. "Your hand is bleeding." Something flickered across his expression then. Surprise. He had not expected me to answer him so fluently. I took a handkerchief from my bag and wrapped it lightly around his hand. "Can you stand straight?" He did, but slowly. His gaze never left my face.
Okay.
"You speak Korean?" "Yes," I said, trying not to sound amused. That usually helps when someone is asking if you're all right. For the first time, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to count. The building doors opened and two security men rushed toward us. One of them called out, "Sir, are you injured?" The moment that word left his mouth, I understood he was someone important. Very important. He glanced once at the men, then back at me. "What is your name?" "Amara." He repeated it under his breath as though testing the shape of it. "Amara. Do you need me to call for medical assistance?" I asked. He held my gaze a second longer than necessary. "No. But thank you for staying." I was about to answer when one of the security men stepped between us politely and said, "Miss, we'll handle it from here." I nodded. Of course. As I turned to leave, I could still feel the weight of his eyes on me. It was strange. Unsettling. Memorable. I told myself not to dwell on it. I had an internship orientation to attend. Whatever had just happened outside was none of my business. Inside the building, the lobby was all marble shine and hushed authority. People in elegant office wear crossed the space holding tablets and coffee cups, all moving with that particular energy corporate people seem to have before 8 in the morning, as though urgency itself were part of their dress code. I checked in at the reception desk, gave my name, and was directed to a conference room on the 12th floor where the new interns were gathering. I remember smoothing my skirt before walking in, smiling politely, introducing myself, exchanging bows and greetings. Some of the other interns were friendly enough. Some looked me over too carefully. A few seemed surprised when I answered questions in Korean with no accent heavy enough to make them slow down for me. I had learned by then that surprise was one of the first things I often inspired in rooms like that. A woman from Human Resources had just begun explaining the structure of the internship program when the conference room door opened. Every voice in the room stopped. Every posture straightened. The woman from HR bowed so quickly I almost thought she might injure herself. And there he was. The man from outside. The one with the bleeding hand and the unreadable eyes. Except now he was not leaning against a car trying to regain his breath. Now he was fully assembled again, every piece of him back in place. Fresh jacket. Perfect posture. Authority settled around him like a second skin. A small bandage wrapped his hand, but it was the only visible sign that anything had happened at all. Kang Global welcomes all of you, he said. His voice was low, calm, and controlled. I expect discipline, originality, and competence. Those who are here because of connections will disappoint themselves. Those who are here because they earned it should make good use of the opportunity. Then his gaze moved across the room and landed on me. Just for a second, the air changed. His eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. Mine must have done the same, because I felt my own surprise like a physical thing. He knew me. I knew him. And now I knew exactly who he was. Kang Min-jun, President and CEO of Kang Global. My mouth nearly went dry. His expression did not change much, but I caught it, that tiny shift at the corner of his eyes, that same hidden almost smile from outside. He did not say my name. He did not acknowledge me openly. But he knew. I could feel it. After the orientation, as the others began filing out, an assistant approached me. Ms. Okafor, the CEO would like a brief word. Every head within hearing distance turned. I pretended not to notice. He was waiting in a smaller meeting room down the hall, sunlight stretching across the polished table between us. He stood by the window when I entered, then turned. So, he said, you work here. In turn, I corrected. Starting today. He looked at my ID badge. Amara Okafor. Yes. For one strange second we simply looked at each other, both of us standing in the odd coincidence of it. You helped me this morning, he said. You look like you needed help. I usually don't. That does not mean you did not today. That almost smile appeared again, quicker this time. You're very direct. I'm usually told that like it's a flaw. Not by me. I should have been more nervous than I was, but there was something about him that made me forget, for moments at a time, just how powerful he was supposed to be. Or maybe it was because I had already seen him human before I saw him important. Either way, the conversation felt less formal than it should have. He glanced at the folder in my hand. Global Business Development. My concentration, I said. My long-term interest is helping emerging businesses scale across regions without losing local ownership. Now he looked properly interested. That's specific. It's also necessary. He studied me for another moment, then said, I remember people who are useful in a crisis. I lifted a brow. And I remember people who almost bleed on me before breakfast. He laughed then. Briefly. Quietly. But enough that I noticed how unusual it must have been, because Mr. Han, the assistant standing near the door, blinked like he had just seen a vase move on its own. That should have been our only personal interaction for a while. Instead, he kept appearing in my days. The work at Kang Global was demanding from the start. Projects moved quickly. Expectations were high. Mistakes were not treated as learning experiences so much as character defects. I could handle that part. What was harder was the atmosphere around me. Curiosity, I understood. I had been looked at before. But this was something else too. There were whispers when people thought I could not hear them. Questions disguised as compliments. Your Korean is so good. You're very confident. You're different from what I expected. In meetings, I would give an idea and watch it float unclaimed until someone else repeated it with a deeper voice or more familiar face. I arrived one morning to discover a set of files removed from a shared drive just hours before a presentation. Another day, someone accidentally sent me the wrong briefing materials and then smirked when I realized it too late. I told myself to endure it. To outperform it. To never give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. But Min-jun noticed more than I wanted him to. Once, during a strategy review, a senior manager openly questioned whether I understood the regional market data well enough to contribute. Before I could answer, Min Jun, who had been silent at the head of the table, looked up from the report and said in a tone cool enough to freeze water, "Ms. Okafor's analysis is the strongest section in this file. If anyone here is confused, I suggest it is not her problem." No one spoke after that. Another time, when I arrived at my desk after lunch to find a coffee spill soaking the corner of a report I had prepared, I heard his voice behind me. "If clumsiness becomes a pattern, we may need to review staffing." He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. People straightened around him the way grass does when wind moves through it. At first I told myself he was only being fair because I had helped him that morning. That was the simple explanation. The safe one. But then the small gifts began appearing. The first was a box of dark chocolate set neatly on my desk before anyone else arrived. No note. The second was a tiny arrangement of white and blush flowers in a glass vase. The third was a sleek ceramic cup warmer because I had once mentioned, to no one in particular, that I kept forgetting my tea till it went cold. Every time I asked around, people shrugged or smiled vaguely. No one knew anything. Or pretended not to. One morning I came in earlier than usual, just after sunrise, and as I stepped off the elevator, I saw someone leaving my desk. Mr. Han. He straightened immediately when he noticed me. "Good morning, Ms. Okafor." I looked past him to the flowers resting beside my keyboard. "Were those from you?" His face remained perfectly composed. "I only follow instructions." "Whose instructions?" He adjusted his glasses. "Have a productive morning." That was all he said, but I did not need more. Later that afternoon, I passed Min Jun near the executive corridor. He paused just long enough to ask, "Did you receive the market expansion files?" "Yes," I said, then added, "and the flowers." One beat of silence. "They suited your desk," he replied. I stared at him, he stared back. My voice softened before I could stop it. They were beautiful. Something shifted in his expression then, something so faint I might have missed it if I had not been looking directly at him. It was not pride. It was relief. As if pleasing me mattered more than he had expected it to. Of course, nothing in a story like this arrives alone. Complication always enters dressed beautifully. In our case, her name was Yoon Soo-jin. I first saw her stepping out of a black sedan one afternoon, the wind catching the hem of her ivory coat, though the weather itself had decided to assist with her entrance. She was elegant in a polished, expensive way that made every movement look rehearsed for admiration. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. The kind of woman who had grown up knowing rooms would accommodate her. People whispered her name before she even reached the doors. I learned quickly that she came from a powerful family with business ties to the Kangs and that everyone assumed she and Min Jun would eventually marry. She arrived at the company under the pretense of assisting with a family-backed partnership initiative, but it did not take long to sense that her real purpose had little to do with work. She watched him too closely. She watched me even more closely. The first time we were introduced, she smiled as if she were blessing me with her attention. "So you're the intern," she said in smooth Korean. "So I've been told," I answered. Her eyes traveled over me, measuring. "Min Jun seems unusually attentive to your department." I smiled politely. "I'm sure the CEO is attentive to many things." She smiled back, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes. He is." Only later did I begin to understand how dangerous she really was. There was always some incident around Min Jun, a threatening message sent to the office. A car following too closely and disappearing. A security alert that came to nothing. And every time, Soo-jin appeared with concern in her eyes and the same poisonous suggestion beneath her sympathy. "This is exactly why we should stop delaying. Our families would be stronger together. If we were married already, my father's people could handle this properly." She presented herself as the answer to a fear she seemed strangely prepared for. Min Jun never looked fully convinced, but he also did not yet know the truth. None of us did. Not then. What I did know was that the more time passed, the less I could convince myself that his attention toward me was only gratitude. There were too many quiet moments, too many looks held too long, too many conversations where the rest of the building seemed to disappear around us. A rainy evening when he insisted on driving me home because my umbrella had snapped in the wind. A late discussion over regional branding where we ended up talking about Lagos traffic and soul ambition and the exhausting loneliness of always being the person expected to perform without fault. A meeting that ran long where I made him laugh under his breath and watched genuine surprise cross his face, as though he had forgotten he could do that. Then came the night everything changed. We had a major presentation due for the morning, and after a chain of revisions, missing files, and one conveniently mistimed reporting error, I found myself still at the office long after everyone else had gone home. I should have left and finished the rest the next day, but stubbornness has always worn my face better than surrender. So I stayed. By 10 o'clock, most of the floor was dark. By midnight, the city outside the windows looked like a sea of distant stars scattered between highways and towers. The office had become almost dreamlike in its silence. Computer screens glowed in empty rows. Air vents hummed softly overhead. Somewhere far below, I could hear the faint murmur of late traffic threading through Seoul. I kicked off my shoes under the desk, rubbed my eyes, and kept working. Slide after slide. Figure after figure. My tea had long since gone cold. My shoulders ached. My eyes burned. Still, I kept going. I did not know that Min Jun was still in the building. I did not know he had paused more than once outside the glass walls of the conference room where I worked, watching me move between the table and screen, watching me fight sleep with sheer determination. By the time I finished the final revision, exhaustion had become something almost physical, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I sat down just for a moment, intending to close my eyes for 1 minute and no more. When I woke, there was warmth over my shoulders. A suit jacket. His suit jacket? It smelled faintly of clean linen and cedar and something darker underneath, something that was simply him. For a second I did not move. Dawn had begun to edge into the windows, not bright yet, just a thin wash of silver blue softening the glass. I lifted my head slowly. Min Jun was sitting beside me. Not across the room. Not standing over me. Beside me. His elbows rested loosely on his knees, his hands clasped, his face turned toward mine. He looked calmer than I had ever seen him, and somehow more vulnerable too, as though being hot in that moment was its own kind of exposure. "You stayed," I whispered, my voice rough with sleep. His mouth curved slightly. "So did you." I sat up slowly, clutching the jacket around me. How long was I asleep? Long enough to stop pretending you were going home. You should have left hours ago. So should you. We both smiled then, tired and quiet and somewhere outside all the rules that had existed between us before. The skyline beyond the windows was beginning to blush with morning. Pale gold slipped in gradually, touching the edges of the conference table, the leather chairs, the line of his jaw. The whole room felt suspended in that hour between night and day when the world seems to hold its breath. I looked at him and realized he was looking at me with no effort at all to hide it. There was nothing corporate in his face then. No distance. No practiced control. Just intensity, and confusion, and something deeper that made my pulse begin to trip over itself. "Why do you look at me like that?" I asked softly. He exhaled through his nose, almost like a laugh, almost like surrender. "Because I don't know how to stop." My heart stumbled. He lifted one hand, slowly enough to give me every chance to move away, and touched a strand of hair near my temple. His fingers were warm. Careful. The gentleness of it undid me faster than boldness ever could have. "Min Jun," I said, and that was the first time I spoke his name without title or formality between us. Something changed in his eyes the moment he heard it. I saw it happen. A man who had spent his life making decisions with his head suddenly trapped by something his heart had done without asking permission. He leaned in. The kiss was not reckless. It was not rushed. It was almost disbelieving, like both of us were crossing into something neither of us had ever stood inside before. His mouth touched mine and the whole room seemed to dissolve into warmth and silence and the slow astonishment of being wanted in exactly the moment I had stopped defending myself against it. I felt the softness of his breath, the restraint in him, the intensity under that restraint, the way one hand had come to rest near my face as though he still could not quite believe I was real and here and kissing him back. Then it hit me all at once, the intimacy of it, the danger of it, the truth of it. I pulled back just slightly. Not far. Just enough. My lips parted. His did too. We stayed there suspended inches apart, both of us breathing as though the air had changed texture. Surprise flashed across my whole body, hot and bright, because I had not expected to feel that much. And on his face, for the first time since I had known him, I saw the same kind of surprise. Kang Min-jun, the man who always looked as though he had already thought 10 steps ahead, seemed caught completely unguarded by his own heart. It was as if this feeling had arrived in him without strategy, without permission, without logic, and now he did not know whether to fight it or bow to it. The sun rose higher behind me then, and a ribbon of gold poured through the glass wall, falling across his face first and then mine. Morning light caught in his eyes. Warmth spread between us. We did not speak. We only stared, locked there in the newborn glow of day, my hands still clutching his jacket around my shoulders, his body turned fully toward mine, both of us looking at each other as though we had just stepped to the edge of a life neither of us had planned. That was how it happened. Not with a grand confession. Not with perfect timing. But in a quiet conference room high above Seoul, with sunrise spilling over polished floors and glass walls, while the city woke beneath us and two people who should have known better sat frozen in the aftermath of one impossible kiss, staring into each other's eyes as though everything had already changed.